Good morning. For some of you, it may be 8 o'clock in the morning. For some of us, it's almost lunchtime. My name is Luis Miranda, and I just want to introduce to all of you these three shows that we are having on this virtual stage to talk about the Latino vote. We're going to start on our first show. We are going to have someone who needs no introduction. You'll see him soon. I'll give you a hint. He is the highest ranking elected official for Latinos nationwide in this particular political cycle. Then we're going to have on the second show, we're going to have the Hispanic Federation talk with friends in the nonprofit sector of what is it that many in the nonprofit sector did to register and engage Latino voters and get them out. And then on the third show on this virtual stage, we're going to have the work of the Latino Victory Fund that particularly focus on how to convince our Latino electorate to vote for candidates who have progressive ideas and they're going to move a Latino agenda and a progressive agenda forward. So that's what we're going to do in this digital stage. I hope you stay with us the whole time. And then we're going to end talking about the future. And we're going to do that with Stacey Abrams, who will need no introduction, but we're going to talk about the kinds of coalitions that we need to continue to create in this country to win. So let me start with the first part where I will be with you of this digital stage and introduce to you Senator-elect Ben Ray Lujan. Ben really needs no introduction. I introduced him as the highest prize that we got as a Latino community nationwide. And those in New York, like those in California and his constituents in New Mexico, we are very proud of his ascendancy from a congressperson in 2008 to now in the next Senate, one of the leading Latino and American voices in our Senate. Ben has an incredible career sitting in the Energy Committee, having had the DCCC for 2 consecutive years, and gente, people elect you to be that, which means that you have to be in pretty good standing among the entire congressional delegation for you to get that job, for you to get the mandate to elect other congresspeople throughout the country. And his progressive legislation has spanned his entire career. But I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to introduce to you and let you speak with our Senator-elect, Ben Ray Lujan. Ben.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you so much for the kind introduction and for all of your generous support, Luis, and for your organizing and for your inspiration. And thank you to everyone that is tuning in for all that you do to support Latino candidates and voters, not just in this election, but in every election. And I know that the planning continues into the future. And thank you to the Hispanic Federation. Thank you to Latino Victory, to Mi Familia Vota, to Latino Community Fund of Georgia, and so many others who put in the hard work and the long hours so that we could be together today. Your work in our communities across key states helped deliver the White House for President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And your work's inspired Latinos, including here in my home state of New Mexico, to get more involved in politics and to get out the vote. Now, a little bit of history. New Mexico was the first state to send a Hispanic American to the United States Senate in 1928. That was followed by the next Hispanic senator, the first Democratic senator to be elected, back in 1935, Dennis Chavez. And I'm incredibly proud to continue that legacy today. I'm the first Hispanic senator from New Mexico in over 4 decades. But it wasn't just me. Teresa Ledger Fernandez is the first Latina to be representing the 3rd Congressional District in New Mexico as well. The growing number of Hispanic Americans in Congress is a testament to our increasing political power, and we're only going to see more Latinos pursue elected office in Congress and at every state and local level. As members of the largest minority in America, it's absolutely essential that our voices are heard in our democracy and that we are at the table. And I know President Joe Biden is going to be an ally in that fight. But it's going to take a lot of work to undo the damage that President Trump has caused across the country, especially targeting our families. From family separation to the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 in the Latino community. But I'm committed to working with President-elect Biden and with each and every one of you to build a better future for our communities. Alongside Senator Menendez and Senator Cortez Masto, I'll be another strong voice standing up for our Latino communities in the United States Senate. Now, there's been a lot of conversations about the Latino vote, but the fact remains that the overwhelming majority of Latino voters voted for President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris on election night. Latinos played a decisive role in the presidential election in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Nevada, and in Arizona. According to Latino Decisions on their Election Eve poll, which Matt will share some more light on, Latinos in the Midwest and the Southwest voted for Biden at rates over 70%. This is in large part due to the strong investments that were made. And again, I've already acknowledged them, but the folks that put the work in, people like Hispanic Federation, Latino Victory, Mi Familia Vota, Latino Community Fund of Georgia, and so many others were on the ground organizing our communities. And we look forward to the upcoming Georgia runoffs. And I know you're going to play an important role in making sure we turn out the Latino voters and taking back the Senate majority. We're going to depend on you for that. And setting an example for future campaigns, candidates need to engage Latino voters early and often. We make the difference in tight races across the country. And America saw that on election night. So I just want to say thank you, Luis. Muchísimas gracias para todo lo que haces para nosotros y nuestra gente. Gracias por todas las bendiciones y el apoyo. Y adelante. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you very much, Senator-elect. You see, mi gente, that we have a fighter on the Senate, and no doubt that our commitment, we all work to elect him to the Senate. Now we need to make sure we work hard to send it into a Democratic majority into the Senate, because the reach and the work and the legislation that can be done, and that someone like Senator-elect Ben Ray Lujan could do, the reach will be so much broader and bigger if we send him into a majority. The Senator-elect mentioned the role of the Latino vote and mentioned Latino Decisions as one of those institutions in our community that have worked tirelessly to make sure that we have the data, that we have the research, that we have the information, that we understand the way our people think, so that when campaigns are out there trying to get the Latino vote, there's a roadmap on ideology and a way to get that Latino vote. Dr. Matt Barreto, who I am introducing next, is the co-founder of Latino Decisions. And Time Magazine called Latino Decisions the gold standard of political opinion research. You know, sometimes we call ourselves the gold standard, but Time Magazine is calling the institution that Dr. Barreto has created the gold standard. And it's important because not only he has worked in this field for decades, he's also a professor of political science in UCLA. He is also the research person, Latino Decisions that was hired by the Biden campaign to lead the Biden campaign in the process of making sure that the Latino vote supported Joe Biden. Shut up now. I want to drink coffee while Dr. Barreto speaks about the role of the Latino vote in this election. Matt.
All right, wonderful. It's so wonderful to be with you. I think Senator-elect Lujan and I can both agree we all need someone like the great Luis Miranda to introduce us. That was such a rousing and enthusiastic introduction. Luis, it's my pleasure to be with you all today. The Hispanic Federation, Latino Victory, so many others. It's a real honor to sit with you and discuss what we all collectively did with the Latino vote in this cycle. And as any good pollster, I have brought a couple of slides and some data points to share. You know, we're all still unpacking the election results. We're still looking through as they're counting the final ballots. What is the actual Latino turnout? What is our number? But we do have some estimates, and I'd like to share those with you today. You heard Senator-elect Lujan reference. It was not just Arizona. It was not just Nevada. There are many states where the Latino vote was critical and relevant. And so I'm just going to pull up some slides right now and start the discussion of where exactly the Latino vote was relevant, where exactly the Latino vote matters. So the first thing that you can see is that I have here a set of data points. Actually, if you can go back to the slide before, Charlie, I think it's on the second. There we go. Thank you. I want to start with Arizona and Nevada. So you see our two states in the Southwest where we really had a strong Latino performance and a strong Latino numbers. We're estimating about 600,000 Latino voters in the state of Arizona, and we're estimating about 235,000 in the state of Nevada. These are record-breaking numbers. Those numbers could go up. Arizona in particular, I'm watching very carefully. It could be 650,000. Okay, this is our estimate based on the early vote we saw coming in, looking at the election eve data, looking at the data on election day. 600,000 Latino voters by themselves in Arizona, we think provided a margin, a net margin. When you take the Latino voters for Biden minus the Latinos who voted for Trump, over 280,000 votes. We're looking at a margin in Arizona that might settle around 8, 9, 10,000. That's what the estimates look like. They're almost done counting all the ballots in Arizona. 8, 9, 10,000. Latino voters, 280,000. Look at Nevada. 235,000 Latino voters. We're estimating that of over 80,000, close to 90,000 margin. Again, a state that was decided by only around 20,000 votes. But it wasn't just those two states that you were probably already paying attention to. Georgia, where you're going to hear from today. And that number, again, this is an initial estimate. I've been looking very closely at the Georgia data. I think that number of Latino voters is going to creep up to maybe 180 or even possibly 190,000. The Latino turnout rate that we saw in Georgia was historic. And just from the Latino vote alone, we estimate at the 160 mark, 64,000 net margin. Why is that? Because the Latino vote was so strong for now President Biden and Vice President Harris in the state of Georgia. It was so strong that it provided over 60,000 votes. We estimate 100,000 Latino voters in the state of Wisconsin. Again, critical to the margin, providing a net margin of 44. And finally, Pennsylvania. I'm going to say a few more words about Pennsylvania and show you a couple of data points on Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, it was a historic vote. 290,000 Latinos voted. Pennsylvania now has over 1 million Latinos across the state. 290,000 voted. And again, when we take the Latino vote for Biden minus the Latino vote for Trump, in Pennsylvania, 116,000 vote margin. What do these 5 states have in common? The Latino margin for the Biden-Harris ticket was larger than the final margin of victory. We can plausibly make the case that our organizing Our outreach, our vote in these 5 states provided that net margin of victory. Now, certainly, there is no question that our community was in partnership with other groups. In Arizona, with Native Americans. In Pennsylvania and Georgia, African Americans. In many of these states, these are very diverse coalitions. But the Latino vote is large enough in number, not just in Arizona, but in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, to make the final vote a margin. All right, let me show you a couple of other states where we're still working to increase the Latino vote and increase what our reach can be, if you look at the next slide. Okay, so here's some additional states, one of which at least, 2 of which at least, Michigan and Colorado, are also states that we had very strong performances in. So let me start there. In Michigan, we estimate, again, similar to Wisconsin, it has a similar size Latino vote. Around 100,000 Latino votes were cast there, and a state where Latinos provided a 40,000 vote margin. Colorado is often now talked about as a leans Democrat or a safer Democratic state. That is because of the growth in the Latino vote there. We flipped a Senate seat in Colorado. And I always remind people who say, no, Colorado is safe. We flipped a Senate seat in Colorado because that used to be a Republican seat just 6 years ago. But now the growth of the Latino vote, the continued strong Democratic performance has flipped that seat. In other states, North Carolina, Florida, and Texas, you see huge numbers of Latino voters. North Carolina in particular is one that is going to remain a perennial battleground state. And the Latino vote is growing in size and influence in North Carolina. There has been historic organizing and outreach in North Carolina. And you see also the story of what happened in Florida, that the Latino vote voted majority for Joe Biden. It is not the case that in either Florida or Texas, it is not the case that the Latino vote somehow cost those states. In both Florida and Texas, if you increase the Latino vote, and you say the Latino vote increased even more for the Democratic ticket, both of those states would have been lost. And the reason, if you look into the data in both Florida and Texas, it is because the Trump ticket made gains with white voters. And so whatever gains we could have possibly made with Latino voters, those were offset because of those gains with whites. We'll have time to unpack that later, but please know that that data is critical. Okay, now let me just show you a couple of data points here for a couple of these key states, and then I will turn it back over to our host, Luis. So if you just advance to the next slide, I have some data here from the American Election Eve poll. If you're wondering where to get the most reliable data, please come to this website, electioneve2020.com. It has the Latino vote across all of the battleground states. You can look within the Latino vote. You can find crosstabs by gender, age, education, nativity, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Mexican Americans, whichever community you want. The national exit poll historically has done a very bad job of getting the Latino vote. And so we have been working with a consortium of groups, African American, Asian American, Native American, and other white allies to produce what is called the American Election Eve poll, which has large samples of racial and ethnic minorities in each state. And you can see our estimate for the Latino vote nationally if you go to the next slide. Nationally, if you just click on Latino and scroll down, we estimate around 70% of the Latino vote for Joe Biden to 27% for Donald Trump. Again, from a very large sample, bilingual, the right number of immigrants, the right number of people with college degrees, the right number of people without. We have a balanced national large sample of Latinos, 70 to 27. That's almost exactly where Barack Obama was in 2012. He was 71-27. And so you can see we are on that pace. Do not believe the hype that the Latino vote somehow underperformed, that it wasn't getting the job done. It was. And we have grown in numbers, as you saw in those previous slides. Let me just highlight a couple of battleground states. If you go to the next slide. In addition to collecting this public opinion data, one of the things that I always do after the election is I look at the official election results. I would strongly encourage you to go in and look at the actual precinct by precinct election results. This is the state of Pennsylvania. Here we've gathered almost 4,000 precincts. We have Philadelphia, we have Lehigh County, we have Berks, we have Luzerne, we have everything in between, Allegheny, all of the large counties where the Latino population exists in Pennsylvania. And we've plotted every precinct on an axis for you. You can find these all of these data points on Twitter at UCLA Latino. My research center at UCLA has put these together. In the case of Philadelphia, or excuse me, all of Pennsylvania, not just Philadelphia, this is all of Pennsylvania where the Latino population is. As you get to the most heavily Latino precincts, again, not a poll, official data, we estimate over 80%, looking at the election results, 80% of Latinos voted for Biden-Harris. You can see very strong consolidation as you move to the right of your screen and you get in those high-density Latino precincts. Very low vote for Trump. Let me show you another state. One of the other big battlegrounds, Arizona, we saw the same trend happening. Here, this is a slide of Maricopa County. In Maricopa County, the largest county in Arizona, as you move to the highest density Latino precincts, the precincts that are 60, 70, 80% Latino in the voting power, over 70, 75% support for the Biden-Harris ticket, and below 25% support for Donald Trump. We saw the same trend in other parts of Arizona. If you look to the next slides, we pulled in Pima County. We pulled in Yuma County, the other two counties that have large populations of Latinos. And guess what we found? The exact same trend in Pima, where Tucson is. It was over 80% support among Latinos for the Biden-Harris ticket. Next slide. And we did the same analysis in places like Wisconsin. You heard me talk about Wisconsin as being a place of Latino intensity. This is in Milwaukee. And in Milwaukee, there are actually a growing number of high-density Latino parts of Milwaukee. If you look at Milwaukee County, look at what the data shows you. As you get to the most heavily dense, high-dense Latino parts of the county, 77% support for the Biden-Harris ticket. Again, not polling data. These are the actual precinct-by-precinct election results. We're just zooming in for you on the high-density Latino parts of town. And the last thing that I want to show you is just to sort of maybe set the record straight in what happened in Texas. If you look at the last slide here, we gathered data. These are just 3 counties across the state of Texas. We now have it for about 12 counties. We're going to continue gathering data in Texas to accurately tell the story of our community for every county across the state. But what you can see here is in some of the big cities, Dallas, Tarrant, which is Fort Worth, and El Paso County, as you get to the most high-dense Latino parts of these counties, over 70% consistently, 75% for the Biden-Harris ticket. We saw the same thing in Bexar County, where we overperformed Clinton numbers. We overperformed Clinton numbers in Tarrant County. We overperformed Clinton numbers in Travis County, El Paso, as you see here. In all of the big cities across Texas, they bucked the trend of what we saw in a couple of small isolated counties in South Texas and then Rio Grande Valley, where there had been a little bit of slippage. But keep in mind, when you see those data points, those are very small populated areas in Texas. The bulk of our community in Texas lives in these big cities, and this data shows the Latino vote was up. It was very robust, and it turned out at 70, 75% for the Biden-Harris ticket across these major urban areas in Texas. So what you can see here is that we have a very compelling set of data. It shows the Latino vote was present. We turned out, we supported the Biden-Harris ticket, and we provided the margin of victory in so many of the key battleground states. So there's a lot more that I can unpack for you. We're still gathering data. I know that was a lot of information. I hope that it was helpful. And I'm going to turn it back over now to our hosts, Luis and Natalie, and the rest of the team at Hispanic Federation and Latino Victory. Thank you for including me. Thank you for having me part of this conversation, Luis. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Matt. I was too busy listening to your data and drinking coffee, forgot to unmute myself. You heard Matt, there will be much more data coming up. If a community doesn't have a Dr. Barreto, we need to invent them. So I want to thank you, Matt, for spending this time with us and for beginning to clarify for so many have been getting misinformation about how the Latino vote behaved and performed in this past election. Thank you, Matt. And now I'm going to let the second show start.
Tengo miedo. Estoy preocupada por la salud de mi familia y mis amigos. Oigo que Medicare, Medicaid y Obamacare peligran y el costo de las medicinas sigue aumentando. Pero parece que las compañías de seguro médico y las farmacéuticas siguen enriqueciéndose. Esto no es broma. Mi familia sigue luchando para pagar servicios de salud y comida. Ahora más que nunca entiendo la conexión entre nuestros oficiales electos y lo que está pasando a mi alrededor. Empieza chequeando tu registración de votante o llama. Yo voy a votar. Quiero elegir a aquellos que se preocupen por mi familia.
Hola, my name is Frankie Miranda, and it is my pleasure to greet you today as the Hispanic Federation President. Let me first start by thanking U.S. Senator-elect Lujan for his warm remarks this morning and his leadership on behalf of Latinos nationwide. And I also want to thank Luis Miranda, for our organization's founding president, for kickstarting our town hall and his ongoing commitment to our community's political empowerment and success. And to Matt Barreto for taking time away from his vacation to provide a more accurate analysis of the Latinx voting bloc. As has been mentioned already, the participation and engagement of our diverse Latinx community in the 2020 election was not only record-breaking and historic, it was decisive. Anyone trying to portray the Latino vote in 2020 as anything but a monumental success is pulling a Kellyanne Conway on you and giving you alternative facts. Esa mentira tiene las patas cortas. It's a whopper. It's flat out wrong. We know that there were more than 10.5 million Latinos who participated in early voting, and that the total number of Latino voters who went to the polls this year to make their voices heard is more than 18 million and counting. We changed the future of this country, period. But this historic Latino voter turnout did not happen by accident. For decades, Latino organizations like ours have been working to organize, educate, register, and mobilize Latino voters to make sure our people go to the polls, to make sure our community needs are heard. And we have often been tasked to lead this work despite a glaring lack of investment in our organizations. This year, we faced the additional and extraordinary challenges of doing our work during a global pandemic that has devastated our community, and a toxic narrative of misinformation and disinformation that has sought to suppress our vote and undermine our electoral power. But I'm proud to say that our organizations, the ones represented here today and many others, rose to meet these challenges with great strength, resiliency, and ingenuity. Today, we will shed light on some of the remarkable work that was carried by our organizations from Arizona to Pennsylvania to Georgia to Wisconsin. And we are ready for whatever comes next. That is a saying we often repeat at the Hispanic Federation, and when the COVID-19 outbreak hit us in mid-March, we responded immediately, changing tactics, adjusting plans, and convincing stakeholders that it was still possible to get our community to vote in 2020 elections. While we could no longer knock on doors or canvass festivals and parades, we utilized the best digital tours, forged and strengthened collaborations with key media partners, and reimagined civic engagement. For example, the Hispanic Federation team safely communicated with over 3 million Latino voters through text messages, mailers, phone calls that reached Latinos in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Wisconsin, and other states. We revamped our hotline to allow citizens from all across the United States to register to vote. Our media partners, NBC Telemundo, Univision, ABC, made it possible for us to reach our community inside of their living rooms. Our hotline received and resolved over 52,000 calls and provided voter information to Latinos across 30 states. Understanding the needs of our community in particular states was a critical part of our strategy. In Pennsylvania, we sought to empower Latino voters in Lancaster, Berks, Allegheny, and Philadelphia counties by investing in community-based organizations that have earned those voters' trust. In North Carolina, we work all year to register and turn out Latinos in Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, Winston, Salem, Greensboro, and other parts of the state. Our team turned out 90% of our targets that requested an absentee ballot before Election Day. Our targets in Central Florida that received a call or a text from our canvassers were 40% more likely to vote than targets that were not contacted. And in similar fashion to North Carolina, our program saw 91% of targets that requested an absentee ballot vote before the election. We did social distancing canvassing, caravanas, parrandas, serenatas, silent door knockings, community socials, you name it. Talk to our people and create community enthusiasm around the elections. One thing was made clear during the entirety of the 2020 election cycle, and that is that the road to the White House and the Senate goes through Black and brown communities, that our work is just getting started. That is why we continue to engage the millions of Latinos we spoke during this election cycle to ensure our voices are heard in the upcoming ones. And we are, of course, now laser focused on Georgia. And speaking of the Peach State, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you one of our great partners, Gigi Pedraza from the Latino Community Fund, Georgia, who will be followed by our great friend, Hector Sanchez from Mi Familia Vota. After they speak, we will have a brief Q&A with them and about our collective work. Gigi, tell us a little bit about your work and what's up with Georgia.
Thank you, Frankie. Excited to be here. Thank you to the Hispanic Federation, to Luis Miranda, to Matt Barreto. I need those charts. I need those numbers. We're so excited to be here. I'm the executive director of the Latino Community Fund. And, you know, we find that Georgia is at the center of the political universe in our country, right? Where Georgia gets to very likely, very possibly decide and define the balance of the Senate and the policies that are going to affect, you know, millions and millions and millions of our folks, you know, citizens, non-citizens, old, young, and, you know, you name it. But to be frank, you know, Georgians are not surprised, right? We have seen, we have lived, our communities learning, owning, and using our power and our political voice, you know, for years. And so the Georgia Latinx voice is unique, it's clear, it's young, it's strong, and it's increasingly influential. We know from, you know, initial numbers turnout during early voting, both in mail and in person, that 40% of Latinx voters in Georgia did not participate in the 2018 election. And out of these early voters, right, that turned out in person, over 50% of them are under 40 years old. And so, you know, we are the Latino Community Fund, the Latinos for Democracy Coalition that has, you know, 6-7 member organizations working statewide. We are ready to continue building on our wins, and of course in solidarity with Black communities, immigrant communities, communities of color, because we understand that it is, you know, our job, and it's, you know, up to us to create a present and a future. Frankie, where, you know, my kids, you know, my 2 daughters can grow up to be who they are, their full selves, without fear of insults and hateful rhetoric, where they feel welcome, and where people like me understand that you don't have to be born here to belong here. That, you know, we are here to stay, and we will continue investing and building our house, this house, right? Because it's our house. And the work continues, and we are ready for the runoffs, you know, with full GOTV, VR, identify voters that may have been purged, working again in partnership and solidarity with our partners and community organizations. So thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Gigi, so much. And we look forward to continue our work in Georgia together. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Hector Sanchez from Mi Familia Vota. Hola, hermano, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, hermano. Thank you for the invitation again. It seems like it doesn't matter what my role is. I'm always working with Hispanic Federation. But about how great your work is, and always looking forward to this collaboration. So I really value the analysis of Matt Barreto, and we need Latino pollsters are so critical to really be able to tell the national story. The national media, the national conversation has been the small percentage of people that voted in certain counties for Trump, and that's the national conversation about the Latino vote. And they don't really understand the work that is behind organizations like Gigi Spoke, Mi Familia Vota, Hispanic Federation, to make our democracy stronger. Nobody has called me about this almost 60% of white voters voted for Trump. That should be in the national story. The national story should be minorities save our democracy, literally, Black, brown, Asian, Native Americans, etc., that really mobilized and came out in historical numbers to say enough to all the hate that we have seen in the nation. Those should be the national stories. And the national stories should be also what Matt described, all these Latinos and Latinas coming in historical numbers to vote against hate, to vote for a better democracy, etc. So I really value the fact that you guys open with Matt and tell this national story. And the story is that Latino vote came out in historical numbers, regardless of how imperfect our democracy is, regardless of how hard it is for Latinos to participate with voter suppression, with intimidation, with lack of investment, etc. The Latinos came out in historical numbers. And one point that we need to make sure we understand in the nation is Latinos receive the lowest investment on anything related to democracy. When it comes from foundations investing on Latino organizations, when it comes to the parties investing in the Latino community, when it comes to any infrastructures investing in the Latino community, we have the lowest investment when it comes to anything related to democracy. It's important to understand because there is a direct correlation between investment and the results. That's the sad reality. And we know because we did this research with NHLA a couple of years ago, and we saw that the majority of the money goes to white communities for voter education, voter registration, GOTV, etc. So it's important to contextualize this. And regardless of these challenges, the Latino vote, the Latino community is in the front lines protecting our democracy, in the front lines saying yes to be coming out in historical numbers. So Mi Familia Vota is one of those organizations. We have operations in 9 states, and we have the largest field operation in the nation. This year, we had almost 2,000 people, 2,000 staff, plus volunteers in the front lines working to make our democracy stronger in collaboration with many other organizations like the ones present here. But there are 2 particular stories that I want to quickly highlight that really reflect why it's so important, why it's so critical to invest in the long term in the Latino community. And those are Arizona and Nevada. In Arizona, 10 years ago, after SB 1070, at the time the most anti-immigrant piece of legislation, our community had enough. And the table, the Arizona table was created. Mi Familia Vota was one of those organizations found in that table. And literally community organizations coming together to organize, hacer el trabajo de hormiguita, to every day knock on doors, every day do voter registration, every day educate, every day do all the work that is so basic and so important for our democracy. We don't believe in the transitional investment in our communities, and we see that every election. People coming and throwing money to say, turn out Latinos to vote now because we need to define this Senate seat, or we need to define this, or we need to make sure that we define the president. Yes, we know how critical and important was this presidential election and the Latino vote delivered, but we need to make sure that the investment is a long-term investment because organizations like ours in this space not only come out in historical numbers when we have presidential election, we're doing the trabajo de hormiguita that is necessary to make this a more inclusive democracy. So Arizona was a perfect example of long-term political power. And we saw this in the results in the Senate. We saw this in the results in the presidential in Arizona. We saw this at the local level, defining and deciding that local election. And we saw that the Latino community literally defined the election in Arizona. And we have a similar story in Nevada. We also have operations over there in Nevada, and it was a similar kind of long-term organizing. But I want to give just very quick numbers before I stop about the work of Mi Familia Vota. This year, we had 7 million direct voter contacts and mobilized around 1 million voters. Today, Mi Familia Vota has done 550,000 voter registration. This year, we decided, and it was a very tough decision, to come out 3 months ago with a lot of protections for COVID and do direct field organizing. So we had 500,000 door knocks, 4.5 million calls, 2.6 million texts, 18 million digital imprints, etc. This is the work that Mi Familia Vota did this year, in many times in partnership with Hispanic Federation. We also collaborate with the rest of the organizations that work in the field, because it's important to make sure that we extend the limited resources that we have. But the final thing that I want to say, if we want to make sure that we have a democracy that is reflective of the amazing and vibrant composition of our nation, we need to make sure that we invest in the Latino community, because everybody talks about the Latino vote during elections, but we need to turn this around and ask the question, who is investing in the Latino vote to really understand our democracy? Muchas gracias, Frankie.
Muchísimas gracias, Hector. Y we are going to try to squeeze at least one question from our audience, right? Because we don't have much time, but for you and Gigi, we heard Matt talking about the incredible turnout, the incredible work that has been happening in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, everywhere. But, you know, people feel fixed, that they're fixed on particular districts, and they have tried to make it the news. So this question is like, it basically said, why the media seems singularly focused on how Latinos in Miami-Dade, Florida, South Texas voted, although they represent a very small percentage of the Latino electorate. Why? How can we answer this for our audience?
Gigi, you want to take a stab, or you want me to go?
No, sure. I mean, I'm happy to share. I know that these are, you know, places, locations where, you know, historically there has been, you know, significant number of Latinos. Not only that, but, you know, in Texas as well as in California, I mean, the line crossed us, right? We were here before, you know, the U.S. was the U.S. as we know it. So I understand that, but, you know, let's not forget that, you know, there is a new day in Georgia, a new day in the South. You know, every 30 seconds, you know, a Latina turns 18. A third of our community is under 18 years old in the South, and particularly in Georgia. Not only that, but over 90% of them are citizens. So I would say, you know, let's focus on the present and the future, because this is what's going to define the lives that we want to have, you know, and the lives and the opportunities that we want to create for our communities.
Yeah. And Hector, why they're not talking more about Arizona and Nevada?
We need to define our own stories, Frankie, and we know that. We need to talk about the stories in Arizona. 75% of Mexicans literally voting for Biden in this case. Similar stories in Nevada. We haven't had any stories literally about the role of Puerto Ricans in the I-4 corridor, Central Florida, over there, literally voting in historical numbers in a particular direction against Trump, and all of us sending a clear message. So the media, obviously, we need to put pressure on the media. We need to have more journalists, Latinos that understand, and Latinas that understand our community. We have seen amazing people from our community telling those stories. But this is a historical problem that we have with the media, manipulating the messaging and really focusing on a couple of spaces, like you say, in Miami or that little town in Texas, and instead of focusing on the structural approach of what happened with the Latino vote in this election.
And to close this section, I have another question. What needs to happen moving forward to build on the record Latino voter turnout this year and truly achieve political equity for our community? And we have 30 seconds for each.
I think, you know, for us in Georgia, you know, we not only need to be at the table, we need to have power at the table. We need to have the resources, the investment, and the trust for our community to lead the programs, the strategies, diverse programs that are strategies, right, that are going to, you know, get us to win. And, you know, like my friend Nathaniel Smith says, you know, invest in us like you want us to win, right? That's the only way forward.
Fully agree with Gigi. Investment, organizing, long-term organizing, not transactional organizing. The work that Gigi is doing, the work that Hispanic Federation, Mi Familia, and other amazing organizations. We're here 365 days a year organizing in our communities. And that's the kind of work that we want to make this a more inclusive democracy.
Thank you so much for all your insight, the incredible work. We're super excited, and I'll see you in Georgia.
Te esperamos, Frankie. Aquí estamos. Y no nos vamos.
Thank you so much. And now we move to the next portion of our three-part play.
Your vote matters. We know you've heard it before. But have you heard this? In 2016, Donald Trump won Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Wisconsin by 240,000 votes. And there were 540,000 Latinos who could have voted but didn't. So if you're wondering if your vote matters, it does. You can protect your bodegas, tienditas, and your family's access to health care con tu voto on November 3rd or before. Text VOTO to 52886 to make a plan to vote today.
And we're back. That was a fantastic commercial that Latino Victory ran in battleground states. And to talk about the Latino Victory Fund and the work that it does to make sure it convinces Latinos to vote for particular candidates that are moving forward our agenda, I have with me our president, Natalie Reyes.
Thank you so much, Luis. Luis, you're an amazing leader, and appreciate your stewardship of Latino Victory. Good morning, actually, buenas tardes, señoras y señores. We've already come to the afternoon here in the East Coast. A special thank you to my colleagues present here today. My name is Natalie Reyes, President CEO at Latino Victory. The 2020 election was nothing short of remarkable for the entire nation and for the Latino community at large. The second largest voting bloc with 32 million eligible voters strong, Latinos shattered turnout records at the national level and in battleground states. A total of 60 million Latinos live in the United States. This number represents 18% of the total population of our great country. There's no question that our government's leadership should mirror the country it represents, but it does not. Only 1% of local and federal elected officials are Latino in the United States. Let that sink in for a second. This power imbalance undermines our capacity to better serve our communities and prevents the creation of real structural change. Latinos Victory's mission is to establish that balance. We work to achieve equal representation for Latinos at all levels of government. Latino Victory achieves its mission by supporting progressive Latino candidates across the country at every government level, state, federal, and local. Our theory of change is that when Latinos are on the ballot, Latinos will turn out to vote because our candidates meet the community where they're at and talk to voters in a culturally competent ways. We have seen that Latinos running for office who support issues that matter to the community unequivocally run inclusive campaigns that mobilize our voters. In the 2020 election cycle, Latino Victory endorsed 86, let me say that again, 86 Latino candidates up and down the ballot across the country. Our staff is small but mighty, and we focus a big chunk of Latino Victory's time and treasure in key battleground states to support our candidates and mobilize voters. We launched coordinated campaigns with our congressional and down ballot candidates. We also ran culturally competent independent expenditures, or IE, campaigns in Florida, New Mexico, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. This election cycle, Latino Victory spent over $1.5 million supporting our candidates through IEs that uplift the historic nature of their races. Our voter outreach also included robust coordinated IE campaigns targeting Latino voters to mobilize support for the Biden-Harris ticket. We were the first national Latino organization to support the vice president back in February of this year before the Nevada primary. Thanks to the support of our partners, we spent close to $9 million in our efforts to elect Vice President Joe Biden. We also ran a multi-million-dollar campaign called Vote Like a Madre to mobilize Latinas, with an A, voters, and we certainly saw the return on our investment. We have seen that Latinas, our voters, were a driving force in voter turnout. As the voting results continue to be tallied, as Matt mentioned, one thing is certain: Latinos, especially Latinas, played a pivotal role in the presidential race in key battleground states. Latinas, as we know, are leading figures in our families, the CEOs of nuestras familias. It is clear that Latinas are among the most effective organizers in our community. Recent voter turnout figures reveal the surge that Matt pointed out, and I want to highlight. Latino voter overperformed. We clearly overperformed in battleground states like Wisconsin, with 100,000 Latino voter turnout, in Nevada, which had approximately 235,000 Latino voter turnout, Pennsylvania, where we were nearly 300 Latinos turning out to vote, and Arizona, with 600,000 Latinos turning out to vote. Given the early investments in Latinas, it is no surprise that they voted at higher rates than Latino men in key battleground states. For example, in Arizona, 55% of Latino early voters were cast by Latinas. And in Wisconsin, 57% of early votes were cast by Latinas. Over the next couple of months, as we've heard today, all eyes will be on Georgia. And Latino voters had the potential to significantly impact the 2 January Senate runoffs. In this general election, Latino voter turnout tripled in Georgia, going from 47,000 in 2016 to 121,000 in 2020, out of which 57 were Latinas. This is particularly relevant because winning Georgia's 2 U.S. Senate seats will allow President-elect Biden to govern without obstruction. Latino candidates also made inroads in this election. We celebrated important victories in Congress to 2 amazing Latino Victory candidates. You heard earlier, Teresa Leger Fernandez is the first Latina elected to represent New Mexico's 3rd congressional district. And then Latino representation also increased, as you heard today, from our amazing Assistant Speaker, now Senator-elect Ben Ray Lujan from New Mexico. We can't wait to see him implement his experienced leadership in the United States Senate. It goes without saying that Latino voter turnout not only impacted congressional races, but played a key role in down ballot races across the country. Their votes helped increase Latino representation in municipal, county, and state governments. An example in North Carolina, Ricky Hurtado, who we're so proud of, became the first Democrat Latino elected to the North Carolina General Assembly. And in New York, we have Jessica Gonzalez Rojas was elected to the Assembly. Cesar Blanco was elected to the Texas State Senate. And in Florida, we made significant inroads, expanding representation in school boards with historic first victories by Luisa Santos and Lucia Baez. Our community faces extraordinary challenges. Now more than ever, equitable representation for Latino matters. While the Latino electorate broke records across the country, there's still work to be done. And when it comes to helping congressional and down ballot candidates make it to the finish line and win. But candidates cannot do this work alone. We need to continue pushing an all hands on deck approach from progressive and Latino organizations like all of us here this morning or this afternoon to make this systematic shift a reality. We have a pipeline of talented Latino and Latina candidates willing to leave it all on the field to represent our communities. With dedicated support and resources, we can send more Latinos to Congress, to state houses across the country, and we can continue shattering Latino voter turnout records to prove that we are finally punching at our weight. Our supporters are the catalysts that make record-breaking voter turnout and candidate victories possible. But the work does not happen every 2 years. The work never stops, and neither should investments. Investment in voter engagement and candidates must be made early, but it also must be made consistently and continuously. Election day is over, but the 2020 election continues, my friends. And as I said earlier, Georgia will be the next battleground state in this race. And we need to mobilize Latino voters to ensure that their voices are heard in this decisive Senate down ballot election. This is a marathon, as we all know. It's not a sprint. And we are committed committed to continue working towards the finish line so we may have a voice at the seat, at the famous table of power, or as Lin-Manuel would say, in the room where it happens. Pa'lante, mi gente, mil gracias.
Thank you, Natalie. We'll continue to unpack all of the info that you brought it to bear in the discussion in terms of the candidates that we supported, what happened with so many of them. But I said from the very beginning that we have a very special guest. And that special guest really doesn't need any introduction. I love seeing her in every night show when she sort of takes whomever the host is into this incredible journey of what has been a movement that she has created in Georgia, what historically we thought was a red state, and transitioned that state into a blue state. I want to welcome our amazing leader, Stacey Abrams. Stacey, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's my honor to be with you. Thank you so much.
Stacey, I want to ask you a question that seems complicated, but it's sort of what I go to bed every night, and the first question that I ask myself every morning since this election took place. You were able to create this movement, as I see it, with three ingredients. Two of them are very clear, very hands-on, and a lot of work: voter registration and fighting voter suppression. But there's a more psychological community part of that, which is hope, that you could do as much voter registration and you could stop as much voter suppression as you want. But if you don't create that aura that this is possible, you don't give people the soul power to go and do something. Can you talk a little bit about this, and how do we do it in creating a Black and brown coalition that we're going to need in Georgia and throughout the country?
Thank you so much. So I think about it this way. If you think about getting registered is like getting the license to your car. You get the license to drive. And then you go out to your car. Voter suppression is when you get out to your car and you find out that they put your car's up on blocks, somebody's stolen your tires, something's happened, you can't move. What you're talking about is that middle piece. That middle piece is actually learning how to drive and why driving is fun. Because so often we see people deliver the utility of voter registration, and we had to do the work of making sure nobody could steal your tires and steal your engine block. But the middle piece, that engagement, that hope piece that you talk about, has to be done deliberately, consistently, and honestly. And it's that honesty part that I think is so important, because it's hard to have hope if you can't trust the person telling you to believe. And we have to be honest about what voting is and what it's not. When we do voter engagement, it is always starting with the question, how can I help? And what that is about is making sure that people understand, I don't need you to pick some candidate. It's not their life that you have to worry about. It's your own. So what do you need? How does your life get easier if somebody does their job well? And if you start with how can I help, you then move into connecting the dots. If your issue is that your job pays you $5.15 an hour, which is the legal minimum wage in Georgia, then you need candidates who are willing to talk about how to make sure you can have a living wage. If you are a dreamer who wants to go to college in the state where you grew up, it's about having someone who's willing to say, I'm going to do what I can to ensure you can attend any college to which you can gain admission. If you care about justice, if you care about healthcare, we have to begin to create hope by acknowledging despair. And the moment we decide to skip over it thinking, well, it doesn't matter, we just need to rah, 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 people don't believe that you care about them. They don't believe you trust them. And so in the universe of organizations I created the New Georgia Project back in 2013, but I also created the Voter Access Institute, which is now Fair Fight. Our mission at first was that middle piece. It was voter engagement. It was meeting people where they are. And so to bring this all together, to build a coalition of Black and brown voters, to build the coalitions that we need to be successful, we've got to acknowledge the common despair, but also the common hopes. And our responsibility is to be honest about what's out there, but also be thoughtful about how we change it, and to not try to make us have the same experiences, but to have the same ambitions. And it's when we have shared ambitions that can be talked about, can be plotted about, and can be executed against, that's when we start to see those coalitions developing and staying together. Because the minute it's about a candidate, we lose people. But the minute it's about people's lives, they come together and they stay together because they want what's possible.
That's sort of fantastic. I wish I could bottle you. I'm sure that people have said that to you over and over and sort of multiply you and send you to every community. You ought to be like the vaccine. That we could go to send around to make sure that energy exists. Stacey, your state, it's about to have a second historical role in this election. It's so unfair, when we put on some group of people an awesome responsibility. I know how unfair it is, because you decide the balance of power on the Senate and the consequences of something like that for a Biden-Harris presidency. Many of us are outside of Georgia and we want to help. But I know that sometimes the best help, it's not to sort of jump in a parachute in the battle area and somehow bring our own ideas of what needs to be done. What do we do? The thousands, the tens of thousands of people who are outside of Georgia who want to help, but we want to help responsibly.
So one, signing up to be a bilingual volunteer is incredibly important. And there are organizations that do this work. I know Latino Victory has a pretty comprehensive list of groups in Georgia. So it's making sure that everyone who works with Latino Victory and wants to volunteer, that they make certain they volunteer and say what you can do. We've got to explain this election to people who went to vote for the president and went home. We need them to understand why the Senate matters, and that may take translating these conversations. So between Latino Victory and Fair Fight, fairfight.com, we can help get people signed up to be volunteers, and we can help deploy them. That's number one. Number two, it's investment. And we always talk about that, but it matters. Being able to invest in these races, being able to spend the money to send bilingual door knockers and canvassers out, that's going to matter, especially to those campaigns. So supporting John Ossoff, supporting Raphael Warnock, and validating them. And I think that's one of the most important pieces we kind of skip over. We need communities of conscience to validate our candidates. So many people are cynical because of what we've witnessed the last 4 years. They have to be reminded there are good people who want good to happen. And so being a validator in those calls that you make, in those emails that you send, in those texts that you send is critically important. The last one is this group that we have within Fair Fight called Civics for the Culture. That's really reaching out to young Black and brown voters, meeting them where they are, sharing it and talking about what has to happen, but using the arts, using influencers and celebrities to really cement why this matters. Luis, you're absolutely right. We do not need a wholesale transformation. We don't need everyone to come into Georgia, but we need people to send their spirit, send their voices. We're going to use all of your help, but we need people to kind of watch that. It's going to take a little bit of time to get this up and running. We're still in a recount. They just decided yesterday to do a hand recount of 5 million ballots. And so while the campaigns and everyone were getting started, we're not going to have a clear through line on what can happen for a few days. So keep watching us, stay in touch with us, and we'll get you more information. And the last thing I'll say is please send people to peachvote.com, because the one thing everyone can do right now is apply for their absentee ballots. Georgia has absentee ballots that will start going out next week. People can start signing up today, and that's peachvote.com.
Stacey, I know you have tons of things to do. The recount is going on, and unfortunately, there's only one of you until you make you a vaccine. You gotta go on and be yourself somewhere else. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. You all take care.
So you got how we can help in Georgia, and we got the energy for this vaccine that we need to create.
She's pretty amazing, right, Luis? I mean, talk about a leader among leaders. I think that she's going to single-handedly with Latinos and Latinas and Black and Brown coalition really push forward and make sure that we win those 2 U.S. Senate seats.
Yeah, it's incredible, sort of the work that they have been able to do before your time as president, Natalie. Latino Victory in the 2018 cycle, we supported several Latino candidates in Georgia when she was running for governor. And we campaigned in Georgia. She sort of welcomed us to Georgia to do door knocking, to do the bilingual translation that she's talking about. And that was impressive then and continues to be impressive now. And something that she said, Natalie, that it's the way in which you finish your presentation that I really want to expand on. Its investment. She was clear that a way in which we can help, particularly those who are not from Georgia, it's to invest in the candidates that they're supporting, but to invest consistently. And that's one of the things that you said, that at Latino Victory, we could not show up every year, every 2 years around election, that we need to have investment consistently. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, you know this well with all your great work, Luis. It can't be stop and go. We are a young voting bloc that needs constant education. And so, we can't come every 2 years and say, here we are, by the way, can you vote Democrat? That's not the way things works, because the other side is investing a lot of money in ensuring that they're a constant in Latino lives. And so for us at Latino Victory, that's critically important, to ensure that it's not stop and go, that we are talking to voters. We're not only registering them to vote, but ensuring that they're voting for progressive candidates, because our values, the progressive values, are those of Latinos. And so that takes time. And so, for us, that's critically important.
And also the honesty that Stacey spoke about. We need honest brokers. And part of what I have seen with the fantastic candidates that we supported, Latino Victory, that some of those that lost, and certainly all of those that won, they would have benefited from support for 2 years, not just for 2 months before election time. What's your take?
Well, absolutely. I think that folks realize like a week or 2 weeks before an election, oh my God, there's an election happening and we might be losing. That's how we should feel all the time. There's an election happening and we might be losing, and so of course, I think that a lot of our candidates, as 86 candidates this election cycle, come to this without the network of wealth, right? They first are raising funds and they can't call their friend and say, hey, can you please, send me $2,700? It's small investments, small donors that come into the equation. And obviously it all adds up. I always say every dollar counts, big or small. And if you don't have time, if you don't have money, then volunteer, because time is money. And so it has to be constant, even for our down ballot candidates. And so, as you know, we spend a lot of time not only with our support. Obviously comes a monetary donation, but we also do fundraisers for them, introducing them to our network of people. And so, I always say, look down ballot and choose some candidates that you want to learn more about, and invest in them, and learn about their stance on certain issues. So, as you know, I think that we really helped the top of the ticket. We really came out for Vice President Biden, and it is in those critical battleground states that we overperformed at 70%. That's why we have President-elect Biden and Kamala Harris, and we're just so proud of being the first national Latino organization to do that. But our down ballot candidates did suffer, because, as Matt pointed out, a lot of people came out to support Donald Trump. And so, we are reshaping and refocusing. We are doubling down on our candidates. There's so much talent in the Latino community, and representation does matter. And so, I think that for folks that are listening, invest early, invest constant. This is not stop and go. And it's really a team sport. And it's up to all of us to engage, to ensure the right representation and progressive values back throughout the country.
And Natalie, we went from the national to the local. There is a runoff in Georgia that involves one of our Latino Victory candidates. Just a second about that, because I want people to keep that in mind, that we have the senators, but we have a tiny little part of our world where we need support for a Latina candidate.
Right, and talk about voter suppression. It's in 2 different days. So the local races are on December 1st, and the federal ones are in January. So we have an amazing woman, Deborah Gonzalez, who's running for district attorney in the Western Judicial Circuit, and obviously she's going to need our help. And we are phone banking for her. We're raising funds for her. We are doing everything possible to mobilize folks to ensure that she'll be the next district attorney there. But just to point out, Luis, and I think that Matt mentioned this, in Georgia we had 160,000 Latinos come out and vote in this presidential. We got to get them all back out. And out of the 160, 112,000 voted for Biden. Those are the ones that we need out there. And so our goal at Latino Victory is to ensure that those 112,000, well, we want to add, obviously, we always want to grow our voter pool, but at least that base of 112,000 voters do come out, not only for Deborah, but also for our 2 U.S. senators.
Natalie, thank you.
Always a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Luis, and I'll see you in a few minutes for yet another briefing.
Right. This never ends. We need to continue to analyze, gente, what happened in this election. We know it's over. We know that baby, it's still in the White House. And I got from my sister this great picture with the head of Trump and the body of a toddler, which is now how I imagine Donald Trump. Every time I see him on the TV. But we know the national election, it's over. We need to look at how we did as a community and learn from whatever mistakes we made and increase whatever good things we did. We know that the nonprofit sector has a place and a role to play. We know that at Latino Victory, when we turn voters for particular candidates, we need investments and we need to continue to do our work. And now our eyes go to Georgia, because in Georgia rests the balance of the Senate. And if the Senate goes into Democratic hands, then we have the possibility to move forward an agenda for Latinos and for the country that includes immigration reform, finalizing DACA, creating healthcare opportunities for our people, and making sure that we get out of this pandemic and begin to rebuild our economy. Thank you for being with us.